So you want to know how to get more mobility with progressive loaded mobility drills. Now today we're going to take a deep dive into this fairly new, we believe revolutionary way of increasing flexibility and mobility. And we're going to show you the most common, probably the worst things you can do that can actually either stifle progress or cause injuries. All that and more coming up right after this. We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.
So we've got Yanni on switcher again.
We're back,
so
yeah, I'm switching. Richie's away today and I'm doing
very professional here.
So Rad, why don't you introduce us to the concept of progressive loaded mobility? Talk about why you think it's called progressive loaded mobility and not progressive loaded stretching, because that seems to be a little bit different to what some people think.
Yeah, so it's a concept that I learned from Ido Portal. I've had the pleasure of working with Ido twice now. I did 2 of his workshops. I've also trained with a lot of his online students and had a really good look into his online programming. And in all honesty, the only reason why I haven't done any of his online training with him is because we've been in so much development of our own program, and it's done wonders for us. So I've been loving what we've been doing and getting great results. And but I've been there was a period of time where I was obsessed with Ido Portal and all of his teachings, and I devoured every bit of knowledge that I could from him, because it was such a revolutionary approach to training that I'd never seen before. This concept of being a generalist versus a specialist, and just adopting anything that you can from movement, which was a cornerstone of the birth of the foundation movement system. It wasn't the only reason, but it was one of the cornerstones for sure. Yeah. So when I went and trained with Ido, he really dissed on stretching. He was quite vocal about that. He talked about how he hasn't stretched in longer than he can remember, and he has an amazing level of mobility and I was going to say flexibility, but I'm going to stop myself there. He's got an amazing level of mobility, and he even went to Odelia, who's his right-hand woman, who on both the workshops that I did was the assistant, and she's definitely travels the world with him and does all the work with him. And she is one of the most flexible and mobile people I've ever seen, like on another level, you know, can stand up straight and just lift her leg up above her head type thing. And he said to her, how much stretching do you do? And she kind of went, oh, I don't even remember the last time I stretched. And progressive loaded mobility, as he talks about it, it's pretty much a very literal definition. Yep. It's a literal description. It's progressive mobility that's done loaded. You load the muscle up, not necessarily with an external weight. Your body weight is enough to load up for certain movements, and we'll show some examples of that, but it can also be done with external weight, and it is progressive, which means you do certain things, and then as you get better, you go to something harder and then something harder, just in the same way that progressive overload works with resistance training, with weightlifting.
So that's where I'll elaborate a little bit, because this is the part that really interests me, and the part that's opened up such big progress for us. We're going to use that word progress and progressive quite a lot. The concept of progressive overload is very, very understood when we're talking about strength training, but it seems to be absent when we talk about stretching and flexibility and mobility training. And I'm not sure why, but we just don't. I mean, I've spent years and years and years of my career as a personal trainer not utilizing the concept of progressive overload with my flexibility training. And I think that this is something that people really misunderstand. They don't quite understand the concept. Now, all of the variables, all of the loading parameters in a strength training program, like sets, reps, rest, intensity, volume, total workload, total intensity load, variation in movement, and the grouping of movements, all of these things, and range of motion, they can all be manipulated within a stretching program or a mobility program as well. And so they should be. And so that's one of the big key things here with the progressive overloading of mobility training that you need to take into consideration.
Yeah, I reckon I've I've put a bit of, I was going to say I've put a lot of thought to it, but I haven't put a lot, but I've put a bit of thought into why stretching and mobility is so misunderstood and why people like us are at the forefront of this movement and so few trainers can do it, and why people come to our gym and they say, I Googled gyms in Sydney that teach calisthenics and mobility and strength, and you were the only one that came up. And I think that it comes from, there's several reasons to it. I think one of them is that people, the reason why people went to the gym for a very long period of time was based around aesthetics, and I think that's still I mean, we both think that that's still one of the biggest drivers that people go to the gym, which we strongly disagree with. And there's nothing really sexy about being flexible. Like if you're flexible and you're standing at the beach wanting to look chiseled or cut in your bikini or your swimmers, it really does nothing for you. But going to the gym and pumping iron does.
Yep.
So I think that's where the first issue comes from. The second thing comes from, I think that people only have the opportunity to get better at something that they can actually learn from. And I know this because when I was younger, I was fascinated with Kung Fu, and the only way that I could get better at Kung Fu at first was watching movies, like watching Jackie Chan and Jet Li. There was no YouTube back then.
Yep.
So, and to get good Hong Kong Kung Fu films in Sydney was very, very hard. You had to go and source them out in Chinatown. I didn't know where the hell to go online to get them. And then you'd have to try and go to a martial arts school and find a good teacher. Nowadays, you don't need to do any of that. You just go to YouTube and type it in. And if you search for half an hour or an hour, you will have more good teachers at your fingertips than you can poke a stick at. So there's more availability of it, but because that's been a newer thing, I think that's why flexibility and stretching and mobility are something that is still something that's only just gaining momentum in the fitness industry.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting, because I do a lot of research. That's how I spend a lot of my time, and there is a bit of research indicating that a flexible and pliable muscle will hypertrophy faster. And there are obviously, we're true believers that true strength cannot be achieved in the absence of mobility. And the reason for that, if I just quickly explain that, is that when there's 6 different types of strength adaptation, and one of the key elements to strength adaptation is the relationship between agonist and antagonist. So if we're trying to apply force in, and I'll use the elbow because it's so straightforward and simple, if we're trying to apply force in a concentric contraction using the bicep, if the relationship between the bicep and tricep is not good, and the tricep is fighting the bicep at that point in time when we go to flex the elbow, then the strength output in that joint is going to be restricted. It's going to be compromised. And that relationship, that play is occurring in every joint, all over your entire body. So when you're squatting and trying to demonstrate force in a squat or any movement, if you have a bad relationship where the antagonist is not shutting off properly because of whatever reason, it can be restricted and tight, it can have tight fascia, all sorts of different things, then there is a relationship occurring here that's compromised. And people will argue that, powerlifters will argue that you shouldn't be flexible because then you're vulnerable. But the thing is, most of those people have never been flexible, so they don't know what the outcome to that is.
It's a bitch of a thing to have to work on flexibility. It's very, very hard. When you make the decision to do it, you realize it's a lot of work. And I get that. I mean, see, one of our closest friends in the industry, at least, Sebastian Oreb, Australian strength coach, he's one of the strongest people in the world, and he doesn't believe in flexibility and stretching. He openly says it, and he says it to us as well. And we have all the respect for him, and he has all the respect for us. He says, I respect you guys. I love what you do. I'd never bag you out personally on social media, and we would never do the same for him. But what we do is so polar opposite, and it's hard to argue a point like that with someone who is literally the strongest person in the world in his division of what he does. But it is in a fixed plane of motion. For example, an example would be if we were to try and get Bass to do a press to handstand, I reckon I would eat my words if he could actually do it. So that's an expression of strength that without flexibility, like when you and me were learning how to do a press to handstand, the strength was already there. That wasn't an issue. It was a matter of developing the flexibility and the end range strength.
Yeah.
And once we developed that, the press to handstand came.
Yeah.
So that's an example of, you know, without that balance between strength and flexibility, you cannot express your strength.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what we're talking about.
But I also find, I mean, for me personally, I found that it really, I've had a life-changing knee injury that didn't happen to anything to do with my training. It happened on the soccer field, which has certainly changed the way I've treated my lower body training, because it's just a constant battle of whether the knee is going to feel all right or not. But when I unlocked my flexibility in my hips and lower extremities before I had that incident, and I was able to squat at full depth. Now, full disclaimer, when I squat really heavy, I use lifters, which is a 16 millimeter solid sole lift. I can do heavy lifting barefoot, but I just choose not to because I've had quite a serious spinal injury when I was much younger, and there's an element of me protecting myself. But the ability to be able to use the full stretch shortening cycle of your muscles in a movement like a squat is like much more efficient and much stronger. And you know, I've never met a really, really tight, very successful Olympic weightlifter, you know, who couldn't hit the bottom end of a squat without compromise. The concept just doesn't really exist that much. I know a lot of people who battle to be mediocre at Olympic powerlifting who are still tight. They're stronger than me, but they're certainly not on the world scale, Olympic or even national level athletes, you know. I got lots of mates who dabble in Olympic weightlifting, and they're very good compared to the standard person. They kick my ass in Olympic weightlifting, but on a global scale, they would not ever make it to an Olympic level or an elite level, you know. Yeah. And yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. Now look, we could just go down this rabbit hole all day. So let's get out on the gym floor and let's demonstrate, because there's a couple of key elements, and we really need to talk about this. I want to talk about it while I've got a mic, because when we go outside, Rad doesn't have a mic. There are some big mistakes made with progressive loaded mobility, and one of them is progressing too fast. You know, you do want to progress all the time, but there are so many variables that you can use as tools for that progression. And one of the key movements that we're going to demonstrate out there today, we don't have all day, so we've got to dive straight into this, is the hips and the pelvis and the concept of being able to get into a pike, because one of the most probably beneficial progressive loaded mobility drills that you can do is a loaded pike stretch. It's so good for you, and if done properly, decompresses the lumbar spine. But one of the things that we're going to ram home here today, because a lot of people do this wrong, and when you force a loaded pike stretch and you're not actually experiencing the stretch in your hips, which Rad's going to elaborate more out there, you push the lumbar into the stretch, and that's not always so good. So let's flick the camera around.
Yeah, look, the way that this works is, so we've had a couple of people, because we've got, for our flexibility blueprint on Facebook, there's a couple of sponsored posts that use an image of me doing this stretch, and you get these people saying, oh yuck, you know, loaded forward flexion for the spine. And there's a whole school of thought out there that says that you should never load up the forward flexion of the spine. It's funny because the people that are really flexible and that can do all of the things that we like to do, they do loaded spine flexion. The people that seem to have all the knowledge in the world as to why you shouldn't do it, they can't do it themselves, and they're not actually very flexible. So I'm a big believer of not taking your advice from somebody that doesn't have skin in the game. And it makes sense to me that if somebody's going to tell me, oh, you absolutely can't do that, that if they can't do it themselves and they've never actually experienced it and all they've got is textbook knowledge on it, that to me doesn't seem like somebody that's a very good person to listen to. So I'm going to give you an example of why this is called progressive loaded mobility. So if you were to grab some weights and all you could do was bend this far forward in hip flexion because your hamstrings were only that flexible, and then you grabbed yourself, you know, 15 kilos or 35 pounds or whatever it is in each hand, and got that weight, and you relaxed your body and got that weight to pull you forward, then that would be absolutely horrendous for you, because You haven't built up the tissue tolerance to be able to handle it. And now what's happening is there's a lateral force on the spine. So the spine, the lumbar spine, has force pulling it laterally. If, however, you can quite comfortably get to 90 degrees or even beyond like I can, what happens now is, because my pelvis has tilted to such a degree, if this is my spine coming out of my pelvis, the force isn't pulling down on the spine that way now. Now the force is pulling down that way on the spine. Imagine that's my hips. This is my spine, this is my head. So if I can only get to here and then I put load, the force pulls that way. That's called lateral force, very bad. But if I can get, if this is my hips, if I can get my hips down to here and then put load, what it does is it decompresses the spine. It pulls all of the vertebrae apart from each other. It doesn't pull them that way, okay? And for me, that feels really, really good. I get a great stretch. Anyway, so we're going to show you how to progress to that. So this is the first one that we use with people. This is called the single leg Romanian deadlift. This is one that I learned from Ido Portal. So we're going to stand on one leg and I'm going to touch the foot to the ankle like this. Do not stand on the foot and do not stand on the ground. My hand is in my lower back and in my stomach so that I can feel if I'm getting spine flexion.
Looking for anterior.
Looking for an anterior pelvic tilt, okay? Yeah. So what I'm excessively putting into an anterior pelvic tilt so that I go like this, and then I'm going to come forward until I can't go any further and then back up. So I'm just going down until I feel this stretch in the hamstring. And this is called a progressive loaded mobility because my hamstring is loaded up whilst I go down, even though I'm not using an external force. So that's a really good one to get started with. 3 sets, 10 reps with a 10-second hold at the end is really good. The next one that we use, this is a really, really good intermediate, maybe intermediate to advanced, just depends on how much weight you use. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my shoulders back and go into excessive extension, and then I'm going to allow the weight to pull me down. This is actually, I'm more flexible than this. I need to elevate myself because the weight can actually go just past the ground level for me. So for me to get the full stretch, I need to come up so that you can see there the weight goes just past ground level. Okay, I'm trying to stay in spine extension so that it's full on in the hamstrings there, okay? And then the more advanced level, this is the one that we always cop flack for, but if you have a look at what goes on in my pelvis and try to visualize what's happening to the spine when I do this. So this is the loaded pike. And now what I'm doing here is just trying to push my knees back. So my quads are a little bit tense, just a little bit. And I'm just letting the weight pull me down. Now, for me, that feels unreal. My lower back, that gives me the best stretch in my lower back. It decompresses everything. Gets right in the hamstrings, the whole posterior chain. It's beautiful. It's a great stretch.
So is there anything else you want to demonstrate, or we'll go in and wrap it up? Because
No.
I just want to talk about the key in there is the PPT or APT. And if you can't achieve that...
Yeah, well, let's go in and talk. Yeah. So what Yanni's saying, I don't know if you could hear him there, but he was saying that the key there is the posterior pelvic tilt, versus the anterior pelvic tilt. So the... you can keep, that's good, okay. Right. So the posterior pelvic tilt is when you do that. So that's when the hips tuck forward under the body, and the anterior pelvic tilt is when you do that. And that's the key. When you do those, the first two, so if I move my hand, I want that anterior pelvic tilt, so I'm really getting into the hamstrings. As soon as I go like that, you start taking the stretch out of the hamstrings and putting it into the lumbar. Whereas the last stretch I did, the loaded pike, we just let everything relax and you just go down because I'm flexible enough that I can go past that point and it's not an issue for me.
Yep. We just had one comment there from Fremen. Bang, if you can't do it, then don't talk about it. That's what we talk about with skin in the game.
Before we go to the next comment, man, I love that you've said that, man. That's really, really good. And We are very big about having skin in the game, and if there's something that we can't do, then we're pretty open to say, look, we can't do this, we haven't heard about this. We try to only talk about things that we can do and things that we've researched ourselves. I always find it very, very funny when people chime into me about, oh, you know, if you want to get flexible, all you do is this, this, and this, and then you ask them to demonstrate it, and they can barely touch their toes, and you think, well, what on earth are you
look,
talking
and there's
about?
another thing about being on top of the research too, because the research, I really do give a lot of credit to Dr. Stuart McGill, who is considered a real godfather in spinal care and spinal health, and especially rehab applications. We've got a bunch of his books here. I'm across his research. But what you got to understand is a lot of the research that he's done on the concept of spinal delamination through flexion, extension, and all movement under load has been done on models. It was done on models where they actually took a model of a spine and then put it in a machine that moved it around and figured out how many times it could be moved around before the discs delaminated. And of course there is a lot that we can take from that that's useful, but there's also a lot that you kind of have to go, well,
no spine in the world ever gets taken through 14,000 rotations without having rest at nighttime where the body has a chance to regenerate itself.
There's all these other factors that come into it. How, there's no regeneration or healing process occurring there. There's no super compensation. And I'm not saying that you should then totally ignore McGill's research, because he's a very smart fellow.
He's got a lot of skin in the game, of course, but I think you have to take certain things with a grain of salt.
That's right.
And I believe when it comes down to me, when there's conflicting evidence, for me, I say, okay, well, who's got skin in the game? Who can actually do it, and what's their opinion on it? And then I look for people like that, and people who are consistently producing good athletes or people that are good movers based with their methods, So before we go, we've got one more from Imdad Hawk. He's saying, is there a reason you choose to go barefoot? There is a lot of reasons. Number one, I don't like doing laundry, and it saves on socks. It saves on the laundry.
You're an idiot.
No, so going barefoot is very, very good for your feet. Very, very good for them. It allows the muscles to work the way that they're meant to. And you just can't, if you live in Sydney, you can't really walk around barefoot. You'll walk on shit and cut yourself, and the skin on our feet is really soft these days because we haven't toughened them up anymore. So in the gym, I go barefoot whenever I can because that's an opportunity, and lucky for us, because we own the gym, we haven't put up any stupid rules for in case the 1 in a million people stub their toe and want to sue us. We've just put rules up here that are practical.
Yeah.
And
Imdad, there's a very, very straightforward reason why we choose to train barefoot, and that is that the foot is it's a proprioceptive mechanism. It's got a whole myriad of joints. And it's
a sensory organ.
It's a sensory organ, and those joints need to move just like anything else. We're really, really pro taking the body through its full range of motion, allowing every joint and muscle in the body to get its effective workout and to be conditioned. And the foot is a major component of that. There's a lot of research to indicate that the disconnect from the foot over a lifetime causes a lot of frailty and fragility when we're older. So we do take our shoes off as much as possible when we train. Rad's just come out of teaching classes, which is why he's barefoot and I'm not.
Yep. Cool. That's all we've got time for. Thanks, Furman and Imdad, for your questions. And if anybody that watches this after we're not live, if you've got any questions or anything you'd like us to answer, please feel free to put a comment.
Shoot them in the comments.
Always. And we are...
This is a very important topic, guys. Progressive loaded mobility is one of the best bang for your buck methods. So are the two that we're coming out with tomorrow, which is FRC and MOILs, which will be on Thursday. Make sure you catch those two shows because they're really, really great concepts. They're really, really cool.
If you haven't got it yet as well, if you purchase the 18-minute stretching routine, which you get access to after you download our free flexibility blueprint, but if you do get that, we're actually, at the moment, this week, we're throwing in a free loaded mobility routine, which has these progressive loaded mobility techniques for beginner and intermediate level. And yeah, so that's a really good add-on if you want to grab that this week.
Absolutely. And also, guys, if you do download that flexibility blueprint, you'll end up on my hit list, and I send a daily blog, which is a summary of the key points from each of these shows. So you'll get, in written form, a really nice succinct summary of what we've been talking about, and because we do sometimes forget to bring things up and run out of time in these shows, and I can't really nail the point. But when I go and write this now after my training session, I got a fresh, clear mind, and I've got an hour to sit down and write it. So anyway, make sure that you get on our mailing list so you get access to that stuff. Until then, tomorrow we'll see you again live here around 9 o'clock in the morning. We seem to be going live these days, and look out for what's coming next week, guys. Huge new program. Until then, take care.
See you soon. Have a great day.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.